Time moves forward no matter what, but the shift you're seeking does not wait for time. It happens in the quiet interior of a single moment, in the space where identity rearranges itself without fanfare. As you listen, notice how the pace of the world outside you continues, seconds ticking, circumstances holding their familiar shape. Yet within you, change can occur with a speed that makes the clock irrelevant. Identity is not bound to chronology. It responds to recognition, to realization, to coherence, not to the slow march of minutes. You've been taught to believe that transformation must unfold in stages, like steps on a long staircase. But identity does not climb. It switches, it shifts. It reorganizes itself in an instant, the moment you stop referencing who you were 5 minutes ago. Time has its rhythm, but you have yours, and your rhythm is not governed by the clock. Your rhythm is governed by the state you choose to embody, even if that choice lasts only a breath. In that breath, you become something new, and reality, the slow-moving echo of your coherence, adjusts in its own time. Consider how quickly your body can respond to a signal. One thought of danger, and the heart races. One memory of love, and the body softens. The external circumstances remain unchanged, yet your entire inner world shifts without requiring time to pass. Identity behaves the same way. The moment you see yourself differently, the moment you stop measuring your change by the speed of the physical world, your internal landscape updates. This update is not symbolic, it is biological, neurological, and electromagnetic. It is the foundation upon which timelines begin to bend. Identity changes in the same way a pendulum can stop swinging the instant it aligns with its axis. When you let go of the old movement, the old momentum, the old narrative, you find the stillness you carried all along. And in that stillness, a new version of you emerges, not gradually, but immediately. You do not need to watch the clock. You do not need to wait for signs. The shift has already occurred the moment your state becomes coherent. This is the paradox. The world appears slow, but you are not. The world appears steady, but your inner reality can transform faster than thought. External time creates the illusion that change takes effort, but internal identity does not require effort. It requires alignment. When you align with a new sense of self, without forcing, without pushing, without waiting, the shift is done, completed, instant. What follows in the physical world is simply the echo of that moment. So as time continues its familiar progression, allow yourself to feel the space between seconds. In that space, your identity is free. In that space, you are not bound to who you have been. You are not tied to timelines built from habit or memory. You are the one who chooses, and the choosing happens faster than any clock can measure. This is where transformation begins, not in the future, not with effort, but in the quiet recognition that identity moves instantly and time simply follows. Time moves forward in its steady, unbroken line, but there is a moment within you where reality pauses, not because the world stops, but because it waits for coherence. Reality does not change first. It echoes. It reflects. It mirrors the state you settle into even for a breath. There is always a delay between who you decide to be and how the external world rearranges itself. Yet that delay is not hesitation. It is alignment. It is the universe taking its cue from the identity you choose now. You may have believed that circumstances must shift before you can feel different, that the world must give you a sign, a result, a hint that you are moving in the right direction. But reality never moves first. It listens, it responds to the signal produced by your inner state, the same way a tuning fork vibrates when struck by another of the same frequency. When you hold a state long enough for it to become coherent, reality receives the instruction. Until then, it simply remains as it is, waiting for clarity from within you. This waiting is not passive, it is precise. The external world is constantly reading your internal coherence and adjusting accordingly. but only when the signal is stable. This is why moments of doubt seem to slow everything down, and moments of inner alignment seem to speed everything up. Coherence is the mechanism that moves timelines. Not force, not effort, not time. The moment you shift internally, the moment you choose an identity that feels true, reality tilts toward it, even when nothing appears different at first glance. Imagine standing at the edge of a quiet lake. Throw a pebble, and ripples begin to form, expanding outward with perfect symmetry. Your internal shift is the pebble. The ripples are the events, coincidences, and rearrangements that follow. But the lake cannot ripple until you release the pebble. Reality cannot move until you shift. It does not matter how long you stand at the edge thinking about throwing it. The lake waits. The world waits. Not because it resists you, but because it mirrors you with exact precision. The moment of true change happens before anything looks different. It happens in the stillness where identity transforms. That stillness is not empty. It is the instruction point. It is where you take the posture of someone no longer entangled with who they were a moment ago. And in that state, even without action, even without evidence, you become the cause rather than the effect. This is the moment reality waits for, the moment you stop referencing the old self and allow a new state to take its place. Once that shift occurs, the world cannot help but follow, not immediately in form, but immediately in trajectory. You step into a different current, and that current begins carrying you toward experiences that are coherent with who you have become. Reality is not slow. It is obedient. It adjusts when you adjust, and that adjustment begins the moment you choose to shift, not when the world confirms it. Effort belongs to the realm of time. The moment you decide to work for something, you step into a sequence. Steps, progression, repetition, accumulation. Effort follows the logic of cause and effect, where the cause must be repeated until the effect eventually appears. This is why effort feels slow. It requires the cooperation of physical reality, which moves with the weight and friction of matter. Every action demands energy, and every result needs time to form. But state is different. State exists outside the timeline. State is the condition of your being in this moment, and it updates instantly the moment you shift into it. You've been conditioned to believe that the only way to change your life is through prolonged effort. You've been told to push, to grind, to slowly carve your way into a new reality. But effort does not rewrite identity. It expresses identity. It reveals who you already believe yourself to be. If you see yourself as someone who lacks what they want, then effort becomes a journey of trying to fill the gap. But state closes the gap immediately. State collapses the distance between where you are and who you choose to be in this moment. No time is required for that shift. Identity does not wait for evidence. It simply reorients. When you rely on effort alone, you are operating from the assumption that the world must change first, that physical conditions must bend before you can feel different. But effort is slow because it depends on rearranging the external world, and the external world changes only after the internal one has stabilized. State, on the other hand, is the signal that instructs reality to begin its rearrangement. The moment your state shifts, your trajectory shifts. The world begins adjusting itself, not because you forced it, but because coherence has communicated a new direction. Consider the difference between pushing a heavy door open and stepping through a door that is already unlocked. Effort pushes, state opens. Effort strains, state aligns. When you are in the right state, action becomes lighter, clearer, and infinitely more efficient, not because you work harder, but because you have stopped working against your own identity. Effort will always take time. It must accumulate. It must build momentum. But state requires only recognition. One moment of coherence, one moment of stepping into who you choose to be, changes the internal landscape instantly. and the external world, though slower, cannot resist reflecting the shift. This is why so many people feel stuck despite working hard. Their effort is anchored to an unchanged identity. They are acting from the old state, and the old state can only reproduce the old timeline. But the moment you shift your state, the mechanics change. Time becomes a follower instead of a barrier. You no longer push your way into a new timeline. You embody it, and action becomes the natural consequence. The world responds to who you are now, not to the effort you applied yesterday. This is the hidden efficiency of coherence. When your state leads, effort becomes minimal. When effort leads, state remains unchanged and time stretches endlessly. Effort is the long road. State is the hidden passage. There is a shortcut hidden inside every moment, though the mind rarely notices it. The mind looks for long paths, predictable sequences, and gradual improvement. It believes change must be earned step by step, but every moment contains a doorway that bypasses all of that, a doorway that doesn't belong to time at all. It appears whenever you stop referencing the past and meet the present without carrying anything into it. The moment you drop the momentum of who you were a minute ago, the shortcut reveals itself. This shortcut is not an action. It is not a technique, not a ritual, not a sequence to follow. It is a shift in awareness, a subtle turn inward where you feel the possibility of being someone new right now. The long road says you must work your way into transformation. The shortcut says transformation is already available the instant you stop reinforcing the old identity. Each moment offers this possibility, but most people overlook it because they are waiting for permission from circumstances. They wait for signs, for movement, for conditions that demonstrate change is happening. Yet the doorway only opens when you initiate the shift first. The present moment is always neutral, always unwritten. It does not carry the weight of your past unless you insist on bringing it with you. When you step into the moment cleanly, without dragging memory, expectation, or pattern, you give yourself access to the identity that is not shaped by history. This is the hidden advantage of now. It is untouched. The past cannot enter unless you invite it. The future cannot dictate terms unless you project it. In the untouched quality of the present moment, identity becomes fluid, editable, and immediate. This is what makes the shortcut so powerful. It doesn't ask you to become someone new slowly. It invites you to stop being who you were. The difference is subtle but profound. You do not build the new identity step by step. You stop reinforcing the old one, and the space that remains becomes the birthplace of something new. This shift is not conceptual, it is experiential. It happens in the quiet instant when you allow yourself to meet the moment without the filter of previous versions of you. Think of a river that carries everything downstream: branch, leaf, memory. If you step into that river, you are moved by its current. But if you step out of it, even for a second, the force of the current no longer defines you. The present moment is that stepping out. It removes the drag of momentum, offering stillness where you can choose anew. In this stillness, you are not obligated to respond from habit. You are not obligated to behave as you always have. You are not obligated to wait for proof before shifting your internal position. The shortcut hidden inside every moment is the possibility of immediate reorientation. It is the truth that you are not chained to your past, not bound by the pace of physical reality, and not required to wait for time to grant you permission. Each moment is a fresh axis, a point where identity can change instantly. The long road is optional. The doorway is always here, opening as soon as you notice it. Time moves forward with a steady rhythm, and most people move with it like a pendulum, swinging between doubt and hope, between effort and exhaustion, between who they were and who they wish to become. This swinging feels like progress, but it is only motion, not transformation. The pendulum moves, yet goes nowhere. It repeats itself. It follows the same arc again and again because its movement is dictated by momentum, not by choice. This is how most identities operate. They swing between familiar emotional patterns, returning to the same states because the momentum of the past keeps pulling them back. But the axis of the pendulum never moves. It is untouched by the swing it supports. It remains still, stable, and quietly powerful. Transformation happens when you stop being the swing and become the axis. The swing reacts. The axis observes. The swing is pulled by forces outside itself. The axis holds its position effortlessly. When you identify with the swing, you are at the mercy of old habits, old narratives, old timelines. When you become the axis, you step out of the momentum entirely. You find a stillness that cannot be dragged by history. The mind is conditioned to believe that movement equals change. It tells you that because you feel different today than yesterday, progress must be happening. But emotional fluctuation is still swinging, and swinging exhausts you because it keeps you tied to the same cycle. Becoming the axis means realizing that true change is not a reaction. It is a shift into a state that does not depend on external conditions or internal turbulence. It is a stable identity chosen deliberately, held lightly, and rooted in coherence. The axis does not require effort to remain centered. It simply exists in its position. This is why transformation at the level of identity feels effortless once it happens. The struggle belongs to the swing. The axis experiences clarity. When you stop trying to correct every motion, every doubt, every emotional oscillation, you begin to sense the still point beneath all of it. That still point is where real timelines shift. It is where identity changes not through repetition, but through recognition. To become the axis, you do not fight the pendulum. You do not try to freeze the swing or suppress the movement. You simply stop identifying with it. You notice that the emotions you feel are movements, not definitions. Thoughts are movements, habits are movements, and none of them are you. The moment you detach from the momentum that shaped your past reactions, you experience a clarity that does not swing. In this clarity, the need for time dissolves. The identity shift happens immediately because it is no longer competing with motion. It emerges from stillness. When you stand in that stillness, even for a moment, you become the stable point around which reality begins to reorganize. The timeline no longer loops in familiar arcs because you are no longer feeding its momentum. The world responds to the axis, not the swing, and the instant you choose that still center, you step into the version of yourself who no longer needs to be carried by old forces. You become the quiet source of direction, and the pendulum slows, then stops, not through resistance, but through the power of identity resting in its true place. Time feels slow on the outside, but inside your body, change happens at a pace that defies the clock. Biology reorganizes itself in milliseconds. Your heart rate shifts in a moment. Your breath reflects your emotional state without hesitation. Neurotransmitters release based on a single thought, a single perception, a single internal signal. The body does not wait for time to pass before responding. It reacts instantly to who you believe you are right now. This is the biological foundation of immediate identity change. When you shift your internal state, even subtly, your nervous system adjusts to match it. The brain is constantly reading your sense of self, updating your chemistry, posture, micro-expressions, and perception to align with that identity. This alignment does not unfold over minutes or hours. It occurs the moment the state becomes coherent. The body is always listening for coherence, not effort. It responds not to how hard you think, but to how deeply you embody a feeling. This is why you can recall a painful memory and feel your body tense instantly, even though the event is long gone. The body reacts to the present state, not to the timeline. Neuroplasticity is often described as a slow process, but its initiation is immediate. The moment you shift into a new state, whether through perspective, awareness, or recognition, the brain begins forming new neural patterns. These patterns might strengthen over time, but the first spark occurs instantly. The old circuitry does not disappear in that moment, but it stops being the only option. You create a new pathway, even if only faint, and the body begins aligning with that pathway right away. This is how identity shifts bypass the slow mechanics of physical action. Biology updates before behavior does. Your heart and brain operate in a constant feedback loop, communicating through rhythm, frequency, and coherence. When your internal identity settles into alignment, the heart's rhythm shifts into coherence, and the brain follows. This coherence can happen within seconds. It's measurable, immediate, and powerful. The body moves from survival chemistry into clarity chemistry, reduced cortisol, increased nitric oxide, smoother neurological signaling. None of this requires evidence from the external world. It requires only the state itself. This is why internal shifts precede external reality. The body updates first, reality second. The senses also reorganize instantly. What you notice, what you filter out, what you interpret, all of this shifts the moment your identity shifts. When you move into a new internal state, your perception changes with it. Opportunities you once overlooked become visible. Choices that once felt heavy become simple. The world looks different not because it changed, but because your biology aligned with a different version of you. Perception is the first outward sign of an internal shift, and it adjusts at the speed of awareness. Your body is not waiting for your life to change before it updates. It updates the moment your identity changes. It follows your state, not your circumstances. And because this update happens so quickly, it reveals the deeper truth. Transformation does not begin in the external world. It begins in your biology, in the internal reorganization that happens faster than thought. The world may take time to echo the shift, but the shift itself happens in the same moment you decide to occupy a new state. Biology moves instantly, and time simply follows its lead. Thinking moves horizontally. It circles, analyzes, predicts, and revisits the same terrain again and again. It tries to solve the future with the tools of the past. It tries to change identity from the outside in, layering ideas on top of old assumptions. But thinking operates inside the limits of the mind's conditioning, and conditioning is built from memory. So thinking, by its very nature, repeats. It reinforces the identity you are trying to outgrow, even when the thoughts sound new. This is why thinking feels busy but ineffective. It cannot create a shift because it operates inside the identity that must be transcended. Identity, on the other hand, moves vertically. It does not analyze, it selects. It steps into a state that thinking cannot access through reasoning alone. When identity shifts, thinking follows. The body follows. Choices follow. But thinking alone cannot reach the level of identity because the mind cannot escape the structure it is built upon. You cannot think your way into a new self while thinking from the old one. Thought is an expression of identity, not a mechanism for changing it. This is why affirmations often fail. They attempt to use thought to override identity, but if the identity contradicts the affirmation, the body does not believe it. The nervous system reacts not to words but to coherence. When the spoken thought conflicts with the embodied identity, the body reinforces the old state, not the new idea. Thinking becomes noise. Identity remains unchanged, and the external reality continues to mirror the unchanged identity with perfect accuracy. Identity wins because identity has gravity. It organizes your perception, your emotional baseline, your instincts, and your behavior automatically. It decides what you notice and what you overlook. It determines what feels possible, what feels normal, and what feels out of reach. Identity is the internal filter through which reality is interpreted, and because of that, identity can shift your entire experience without any external changes occurring first. Thinking cannot accomplish this because thinking does not have that kind of organizing power. The moment your identity shifts, everything you once struggled to think your way through becomes effortless, not because the world becomes easier, but because you stop resisting your own direction. Thinking loses its friction when it aligns with identity instead of trying to override it. The internal conflict dissolves. Coherence replaces effort. You are no longer arguing with your own state, you are simply expressing it. Thinking tries to manage the swing of the pendulum. Identity becomes the axis. Thinking tries to solve problems created by an outdated sense of self. Identity removes the conditions that made those problems inevitable. Thinking tries to predict the future based on past patterns. Identity creates a new pattern that thinking then adapts to. The hierarchy is clear. Identity leads, thought follows. The reason identity wins is simple. Reality responds to state, not to thoughts. It mirrors the coherence you embody, not the words you repeat in your mind. The moment you shift identity, even before you think anything new, your biology, your perception, and your trajectory adjust. Thinking cannot produce this, but identity can achieve it in a single moment, because identity is the signal that reality listens to. Emotion moves through you like a frequency, subtle yet powerful, shaping the way you interpret and respond to the world. Every emotion carries a vibration, a tone your body recognizes instantly. It shifts your breath, your posture, your attention. It primes your nervous system toward openness or protection, coherence or fragmentation. Emotion sets the atmosphere of your inner world, but identity determines the signal you emit. The frequency is the texture. The signal is the instruction. This distinction is quiet but essential, because emotion alone cannot shift your timeline unless it is anchored in identity. Think of emotion as the color of light and identity as the direction that light travels. The color influences how reality feels, but the direction determines where it goes. You can feel elevated emotion for a moment, but if the underlying identity contradicts it, the frequency dissipates. It becomes a momentary experience rather than a coherent signal. Identity is what stabilizes frequency into something reality can respond to. Without identity, emotion flickers. With identity, emotion becomes coherent, concentrated, and meaningful. This is why temporary emotional highs rarely produce lasting change. They are fluctuations in frequency, but not shifts in identity. Identity is the transmitter. It sends a clear message to your biology and to your environment, whether or not you consciously realize it. Emotion is immediate. Identity is foundational. When the two align, the signal becomes unmistakable. You feel as if you are already living the timeline you choose, and that feeling doesn't come and go. It becomes the baseline from which you move. Your nervous system is always reading both layers. It responds to the emotion you feel, but organizes itself around the identity you hold. When you adopt an identity, even for a moment, your entire system adjusts to support it. Your perception changes, your interpretation changes, your choices change, and your internal chemistry follows. Emotion alone cannot do this. But emotion aligned with identity produces coherence, and coherence is what shifts timelines. Timeline movement is not caused by intensity of emotion, but by clarity of signal. A clear signal emerges when identity becomes the anchor point. Emotion amplifies the signal, giving it depth and resonance, but it cannot replace identity. You can think of identity as the structure and emotion as the energy moving through the structure. When the structure is aligned with the state you intend to embody, emotion reinforces the coherence. When the structure is misaligned, Emotion disperses without creating lasting change. The external world responds to this signal the same way instruments respond to a tuning fork. The fork does not need to shout. It simply vibrates consistently. Its consistency influences everything around it. When your identity stabilizes around a chosen state, the world reorganizes in response. Emotion enriches the vibration, but identity provides the clarity that reality mirrors. This is why identity shifts are immediate, while emotional shifts can be temporary. Identity tells the universe who you are. Emotion colors how that identity feels. When you understand emotion as frequency and identity as signal, you stop chasing emotional highs and begin stabilizing internal coherence. You realize that you do not need intensity to shift timelines. You need alignment. You need the quiet conviction that comes from choosing who you are in this moment. And once that choice is made, emotion naturally rises to support it, creating a field of frequency that reality cannot ignore. Reality responds to you with a precision that is almost unsettling. Not to your wishes, not to your thoughts, not to your effort, but to your internal state. This is the quiet law beneath all change. The quantum field mirrors coherence. It listens to the state you occupy, the identity you stabilize, the emotional signal you emit without speaking a word. External conditions may appear slow, but they are following instructions given by the internal world. This is the obedience of reality, not in the sense of submission, but in the sense of resonance. What is coherent within you becomes inevitable around you. The quantum field does not interpret your intentions the way the mind does. It does not distinguish between imagination and memory, desire and experience. It responds only to the frequency of the state you embody. The moment your internal state becomes consistent, reality begins reorganizing in alignment with it. This reorganization may unfold gradually on the surface, but the shift in direction happens instantly as soon as the signal is clear. The field obeys coherence because coherence carries the strongest instruction. Fragmentation sends mixed messages. Certainty sends one. You have experienced this countless times without naming it. When you feel grounded, clear, and centered, events tend to flow more easily. When you feel scattered or doubtful, events tend to mirror that same disarray. The world is not reacting to your emotions directly. It is reacting to the internal state those emotions stabilize. Emotion is the vibration, but the state is the blueprint. What the quantum field mirrors is the blueprint. This is why two people can hold the same desire but receive entirely different outcomes. One holds the state of already being aligned with the desire. The other holds the state of wanting it. The field obeys both states faithfully. This obedience is neutral. It does not reward or punish. It reflects. It translates your internal consistency into external structure. When your state is coherent, the field does not delay. It begins sending synchronicities, shifts, opportunities, and dissolutions that match the identity you have chosen. When your state conflicts with your desires, the field mirrors the conflict. It is not personal. It is mechanical. The quantum realm operates like a tuning system, and your state is the dominant frequency that instructs reality on what to express next. The power in this is immediate. It means you do not have to wait for time to grant you progress. You do not have to work your way into a new timeline. You only have to stabilize into the state that corresponds with it. The shift begins in the moment you occupy the identity that aligns with the life you want. External reality may take its necessary time to catch up, but the underlying trajectory changes instantly. The moment you shift, the quantum field recalibrates. It prepares the path ahead based on the internal signal you emit now. This is why internal work is never wasted. It is the foundation upon which all external outcomes are built. And this is why the quantum field feels obedient. It is following the clearest signal available. When your state changes, the field responds. When your identity stabilizes, the world rearranges. It cannot do otherwise, because coherence is the instruction that reality echoes without hesitation. Feeling as if is a simple idea, yet it is one most people have never been taught. It begins with understanding that your internal state, not your effort, not your thoughts, not your timeline, determines how reality responds to you. Feeling as if means stepping into the emotional and psychological position of someone who already has what they desire, even before anything in the external world changes. It is not pretending. It is not daydreaming. It is not trying to believe something you know is not yet visible. It is the act of allowing your identity to shift first, before the world has a chance to reflect it. Most people live in the state of wanting. Wanting feels like reaching. It feels like distance, longing, waiting, monitoring. Wanting keeps the desire in the future and places you in the position of someone who does not yet have it. Feeling as if moves you out of that position. It brings the desired reality inward and allows you to meet it now, not with logic or imagination, but with a quiet internal acceptance. To someone hearing this for the first time, it may sound abstract, but it is something you've already experienced in small ways. Think of moments when you knew something good was coming before seeing it. Think of times when you walked into a room already feeling confident, even before anyone greeted you. Think of moments when you felt loved before receiving the message or the gesture. The body accepted the state before the evidence appeared. Feeling as if works the same way, but deliberately. It means adopting the emotional baseline of the reality you desire, not in an exaggerated or forced way, but in the calm, natural way you feel about things that are already true in your life. You do not feel heightened emotion about having a roof over your head, or about knowing your own name, or about having abilities you've practiced for years. Those things feel normal, certain, stable. Feeling as if applies that same sense of normalcy to the outcome you're calling in. There is no strain in this, no intensity required. Feeling as if is subtle, like settling into a comfortable chair. It is the shift from "I hope this happens" to "this is who I am now." The moment this internal shift takes place, your nervous system begins updating automatically. Your perception changes. Your attention changes. Your behavior softens into alignment with the identity you just adopted. And without realizing it, you begin inhabiting a different timeline. Not because you forced it, but because you entered the state that corresponds to it. You don't need vivid imagination or emotional fireworks. You only need to occupy the identity that naturally feels aligned with having the desire. Feeling as if is the act of letting your inner world move first. When you do, the outer world eventually obeys, because it always reflects the state you hold most consistently. This is the essence of the technique, a quiet, immediate shift in who you are being, long before the physical world catches up. There is a version of you already living the timeline you desire. And this chapter is about meeting that version from the inside, rather than reaching for them from the outside. This identity is not a fantasy, not a projection, and not a distant future self. It is a state of being that already exists as a possibility within you, waiting for you to step into it. When people think about their desired reality, they imagine circumstances, events, and outcomes. But timelines don't shift because circumstances change. They shift because identity does. The version of you who already has what you want does not live in a different place or a different year. They live in a different state. This identity holds a different posture toward life, not physically, but psychologically. They relate to their world with a baseline of normalcy about the very thing you are still hoping for. What feels extraordinary to you now feels ordinary to them. What feels out of reach to you now feels stable and integrated in their experience. When you consider this identity, you are not imagining a future version of yourself. You are sensing the internal configuration of a self that already aligns with the desired timeline. And alignment is not about effort. It is about recognition. You meet this identity not by thinking about them, but by noticing how they would feel moving through the present moment. This identity doesn't wait for signs. They don't check for progress. They don't ask if the shift is working. They live in the state where the outcome is already woven into their sense of self, and because of that, their nervous system moves differently. Their reactions soften, their expectations shift, and their perception filters the world through a different lens. You aren't trying to become them. You are accessing the version of you that already exists, without the resistance of the old identity. The key is subtlety. This is not about imagining details, recreating scenarios, or visualizing outcomes. It is about tuning into the emotional baseline of someone for whom the desire is already fulfilled. That baseline is typically quieter than people expect. It is not excitement. It is stability. It is not intensity. It is familiarity. The identity living your desired timeline is not dazzled by the outcome. They are centered in it. They breathe from it. They navigate life with the calm certainty that comes from embodiment, not anticipation. When you touch this identity even for a moment, something inside you recognizes the coherence. You feel a shift that is not dramatic but unmistakable. A soft settling, a quiet alignment, a sense of this fits. That feeling is the doorway. You are not imagining something that isn't real. You are stepping into a state that has been available to you all along. And when you hold that state, even briefly, the old identity loses its grip. The momentum of the past weakens. You become less interested in monitoring time and more anchored in the present version of yourself. This identity is not a goal. It is a home you return to. The timeline responds to the identity you occupy, and the moment you align with the one already living your desired reality, the world begins its slow but certain reorganization around you. You don't enter the state by pushing your way into it. You enter it the same way you enter any natural experience in your life, by allowing it. Forcing creates tension, and tension belongs to the identity that is still trying to become. But the state you're stepping into is the one where becoming is already complete. This means the doorway cannot be opened through effort. It opens through ease, through quiet recognition, through the simple willingness to loosen your grip on the version of you that insists things are not yet aligned. When people first hear about stepping into a new state, they try to manufacture feelings or generate intensity. They attempt to replicate the excitement they imagine they would feel if their desire were already real. But excitement is not the goal. Excitement is temporary. The state you are entering is stable. It is calm. It feels natural rather than dramatic. When you try to force emotion, you reinforce the belief that you are not yet the version of yourself who already has the outcome. The harder you try, the more you highlight the gap you are attempting to close. Entering the state without forcing it begins with letting go of that effort. Imagine settling into a chair that fits the shape of your body perfectly. You don't have to adjust yourself. You don't have to hold any tension. You simply allow yourself to rest into the support already there. Entering a new identity works the same way. You do not create the state. You recognize it. You allow your body to soften out of the old pattern. You let the desire stop feeling like something separate from you. The shift happens in the release, not the exertion. The key is noticing the subtle moment when the old identity loosens. It may feel like a quiet exhale, a gentle dropping of shoulders, a slight unclenching in the mind. This is not a technique you perform. It is an orientation you allow. You are not trying to feel as if your desired reality is true. You are stepping into the version of you for whom it already feels normal. That distinction matters. If you chase the feeling, you remain outside the state. If you soften into it, you find yourself already inside. The state does not demand precision or perfection. It does not require a strong emotional reaction. It only requires that you stop resisting what already wants to rise within you. You are not climbing toward the identity. You are letting it surface. You are letting the noise settle so the signal can appear. And that signal, the quiet familiarity of the version of you who already has what you desire, emerges naturally when you stop trying to produce it. Entering the state is not an act of will. It is an act of receiving. You receive the version of yourself that fits the reality you want, not through pressure, but through coherence. When you allow the tension to drop, the state reveals itself. It meets you in the space where effort ends and recognition begins. You don't need to hold the state for long. A few seconds of coherence carry more transformational power than minutes of forced effort. This is because identity does not shift through duration. It shifts through clarity. The moment your internal world aligns with the version of you who already has what they desire, even briefly, the signal becomes unmistakable. Your nervous system receives it instantly. Your perception adjusts instantly. Your trajectory updates instantly. Time may move slowly, but the body and the field respond immediately to a coherent state, no matter how short the moment is. People often believe they must maintain a feeling for long stretches of time to create change. They worry that a fleeting moment isn't enough, or that they need to stay in the state for minutes or hours to see results. But this misconception comes from confusing effort with identity. Effort needs duration. Identity does not. Identity shifts in the instant you stabilize into a new internal truth, even if that stabilization lasts only a breath. What matters is not how long you hold the state, it's how real it feels in the moment you touch it. Think about how quickly your body reacts to a sudden memory or a surprising thought. A single moment can raise your heart rate or calm your entire system. Biology responds to the signal, not the length of the signal. When you feel as if your desire is already real, your body registers that state immediately. It doesn't need you to hold it. It needs you to access it. A few seconds of alignment are enough to begin rewiring your internal patterns, because coherence creates direction. Once the direction is set, the field begins reorganizing around it. This is why brief moments often lead to noticeable changes in perception soon after. You might find yourself making different decisions without trying, noticing different opportunities, or feeling less reactive to old triggers. These subtle shifts are not random. They are the natural consequences of a state that, even for a moment, became more real than the identity you held before. A few seconds of coherence can outweigh hours of internal conflict, because coherence is clean while conflict is fragmented. You do not need to maintain the state. You only need to touch it consistently. Over time, these short windows accumulate, not as effort, but as familiarity. The state begins to feel natural. Your system learns it the same way it learns any pattern, through repetition, not duration. And the repetition does not have to be forced. It can be gentle, spontaneous, even effortless. Each moment you touch the state reinforces it, like tapping a tuning fork that eventually brings the whole room into resonance. The idea that transformation requires endurance is a misunderstanding. Endurance belongs to effort. Identity belongs to immediacy. A few seconds of coherence is enough to shift your internal signal. And once the signal shifts, the external timeline begins adjusting automatically. Reality doesn't need you to hold the state for long. It only needs you to enter it, even briefly, with clarity. Your nervous system is always the first part of you to register a change in identity. Long before anything shifts in your external world, and even before you consciously notice a difference in your thoughts, the body begins updating its internal patterns to match the state you've stepped into. This is why patience is not about waiting for results. It's about allowing the body to reorganize itself without interference. When you adopt the state of the version of you who already has what they desire, the nervous system receives that as a new baseline. It doesn't question it. It adapts. The nervous system updates in subtle ways. Your breath shifts. Your muscles release tension they didn't know they were holding. Your sense of vigilance softens. Your awareness becomes more open, as if the world looks slightly different even though nothing outside has changed. These changes may feel small, but they are the first indicators that the identity shift has begun. Most people overlook these signs because they expect transformation to feel dramatic, but the nervous system works quietly, regulating the body toward coherence. Letting your nervous system update first means you stop checking the external world for evidence. You stop asking whether the shift is working. You stop trying to confirm progress through circumstances that haven't had time to rearrange yet. The external timeline moves slower than the internal one. If you judge the shift by what you see outside, you disrupt the very coherence you created. The nervous system needs space to integrate the new identity without the pressure of constant monitoring. This update is not psychological alone, it is biological. When you enter a new state, even briefly, your nervous system begins adjusting hormone levels, heart rhythms, and neurological patterns to match it. If the state is one of having rather than wanting, the body moves toward regulation instead of tension. It recalibrates towards safety, certainty, and ease. These internal adjustments create the foundation for the external timeline to shift because they influence your perception, behavior, and choices at a deeper level than thought ever could. As the nervous system updates, old triggers lose intensity. Situations that once created fear or doubt begin to feel neutral. Opportunities that once seemed invisible become noticeable. You find yourself responding differently without trying to. This is not because you forced a new mindset, but because your biology is now aligned with the identity you have chosen. The nervous system is guiding you toward coherence, and coherence naturally produces new outcomes. Allowing this update means letting the body move at its own pace. You don't force calm. You don't chase certainty. You don't attempt to accelerate integration. You simply allow the identity shift to take root by trusting the internal process more than the external timeline. When the nervous system updates first, the world follows in its own time, reorganizing around the signal you've stabilized. The shift begins inside, quietly and unmistakably long before the evidence appears. Time moves forward in a straight, predictable line, but the shift you seek does not depend on that line at all. Identity does not wait for minutes or hours to pass before it changes. It does not rely on sequence, progression, or accumulation. The moment you step into a coherent state, the shift has already happened, even if nothing external reflects it yet. This is because the mechanism of transformation does not occur within time. It occurs in the timeless space of awareness, where identity reorganizes instantly and without effort. Time is only the stage on which the effects appear later. Most people assume that change must follow the rules of the physical world, that it must move slowly, step by step, in observable increments. But physical change follows internal change. It does not initiate it. Internal change belongs to a different dimension altogether, one where the past and future have no influence. When you shift into a new identity, you are not negotiating with the past or forecasting the future. You are stepping into a state that exists outside those constraints. The shift bypasses the linear timeline, and this is why it feels immediate. It does not require the past to resolve. It does not require the future to form. It only requires presence. Presence is timeless. The present moment does not belong to the clock. It is the only space in your experience where you are not defined by what came before or what you expect next. When you enter the present fully, even for a breath, the identity shift can occur unbound by memory or anticipation. This is why moments of clarity feel instantaneous. They arise from the part of you that is untouched by time. In that space, the old identity cannot hold you, and the new identity does not need time to establish itself. It simply becomes true. The reason the external world seems slower is because the physical dimension translates internal signals into form gradually. But the internal signal, the identity shift, does not happen gradually. It happens in a single point of awareness. This is the paradox. The shift is instant, but the unfolding is sequential. You change now, the world echoes later. You move into a new timeline internally. Time rearranges itself to reflect that choice externally. The gap between the shift and the evidence is not delay, it is translation. Understanding this removes the pressure to monitor progress. You do not need to check the clock or track how much time has passed since you entered the state. Time has nothing to do with it. The shift happened the moment you stepped into coherence. What follows is simply the gradual rearrangement of physical conditions around your new identity. This rearrangement belongs to time, but the identity shift does not. When you grasp that transformation occurs outside of time, waiting becomes irrelevant. You stop expecting change to come from the future. You stop referencing the past for validation. You rest in the timeless truth that identity is not bound by chronology. The shift has already happened in the only place it ever could, in the present moment. And time, moving forward as it always does, is now aligning with the version of you that emerged from that timeless point. Time serves the version of you that stands in coherence. Most people live as if they are servants to time, waiting for the right moment, hoping circumstances will shift, believing that change must be earned through duration. They watch the clock for proof that transformation is underway. But when you step into the identity that already aligns with your desired timeline, the relationship reverses. You no longer move according to time. Time moves according to you. It reorganizes around the state you hold, not the effort you exert. This shift is not philosophical. It is experiential. The moment you anchor into the identity that matches your chosen reality, time begins rearranging events, opportunities, and synchronicities to support it. Becoming the version of you that time serves means you stop running ahead or falling behind. You stop trying to catch up to imagined futures or escape the weight of past versions of yourself. Instead, you stand in the center, the axis rather than the swing, and allow time to circulate around your coherence. This identity does not chase outcomes because outcomes are already folded into their sense of self. The version of you living your desired timeline does not wait for signs of progress. Progress unfolds naturally because it is responding to their internal signal. This is not about pretending to be someone else. It is about recognizing the version of you that already exists beyond the limitations of your previous timeline. This identity holds a different relationship with time. They do not worry about how long things take because their sense of reality is not built on waiting. Their internal posture communicates certainty, not urgency. When you adopt that posture, even quietly, time becomes an ally rather than an obstacle. In this state, you begin to notice a subtle shift in how you perceive the unfolding of events. Timing feels smoother. Delays lose their charge. Opportunities appear in moments that previously would have seemed random. These are not coincidences. They are the natural movement of a timeline reorganizing around your identity. Time bends around coherence because coherence sends a clear instruction to the field. The version of you that time serves does not force alignment. They hold the state that makes alignment inevitable. This relationship with time also changes how you respond to uncertainty. The old identity feels threatened by unpredictability because it depends on external markers to confirm its direction. The new identity is anchored internally. It moves with confidence even when the path is still forming, because it knows that time must synchronize with the state it holds. You stop asking, "When will it happen?" and begin sensing the quiet truth that it is already in motion. As you embody this identity, you feel a growing sense of inevitability, not a rigid certainty, but a calm recognition that the timeline is already shaped by your internal coherence. You no longer serve time by trying to keep pace with it. Time serves you by aligning itself with the version of you that has already chosen who they are. This is the shift from being carried by time to becoming the point around which time arranges itself. The world is not static. It is responsive, adaptive, and constantly reorganizing itself around the internal state you occupy. Most people believe the world changes first and then they respond. But the sequence is the opposite. Your state sends a signal and reality rearranges in accordance with it. This reorganization may not be visible immediately, but the moment your internal identity shifts, the trajectory of your external timeline bends. The world begins moving toward coherence with the state you are holding, because that state becomes the template reality mirrors. When you shift internally, you may notice subtle patterns emerging before anything dramatic occurs. You might start seeing opportunities you once overlooked. You might encounter people, conversations, or resources that seem unusually timed, as if the world is nudging you toward alignment. These are not coincidences, they are reflections. The field around you is responding to the frequency of your identity, because identity carries more weight than desire or thought. The world is always reading your state, not your intentions. This rearrangement is gentle at first. You may find the things that belong to your old identity becoming less interesting, less compelling, or less available. Paths that once felt natural may begin to feel heavy or out of sync. This is not blockage. It is recalibration. The world is closing the doors that align with your former state and opening the ones that align with your new one. This process can appear random, but it is precise. Reality adjusts itself around the version of you that has stepped forward. As you hold your new state with even small moments of coherence, the world begins echoing it in ways that feel almost eerily intentional. A message arrives at the right time. A conversation opens a door. A delay reveals itself as a redirection. The more coherent your internal state becomes, the more quickly these external reflections appear. This is because coherence creates clarity. The field cannot misinterpret a clear signal. It bends around it, reorganizing events, timelines, and sequences to match what you have chosen internally. This rearrangement does not require you to control anything. In fact, the more you try to control it, the less fluid it becomes. Your role is not to manage outcomes, but to maintain alignment with the identity that already matches the timeline you desire. When you stand in that identity, even quietly, the world takes its cue. This is why people often speak of unexpected breakthroughs or perfect timing when they shift states. These events are not exceptions. They are the natural consequence of internal coherence. The world rearranging around your state is not magic. It is a fundamental principle of how identity interacts with possibility. The state you hold influences your perception, and perception influences your choices. Your choices influence your path, and your path influences the experiences you encounter. But beneath all of that is a deeper truth. Reality responds directly to coherence, not sequence. When your state changes, the path ahead reshapes itself, sometimes gently, sometimes dramatically, because it is aligning with the version of you that has already stepped into a new timeline. The world follows the identity you embody, and when that identity is clear, reality cannot help but rearrange to match it. The first signal always appears quietly, almost subtly, as if reality is testing the clarity of your new state. It isn't dramatic, it isn't loud, it does not arrive with certainty or fanfare. It comes as a gentle pull, a nudge, an inner recognition that something aligns with who you have just become. This signal is the world's first response to your internal shift, but most people overlook it because they expect something bigger, something undeniable. Yet the first signal rarely feels overwhelming. It feels natural, and that naturalness is precisely what makes it easy to doubt. Following it without hesitation is how you anchor the new timeline. When you step into a new identity, the world begins rearranging around your state. But rearrangement always begins with an invitation. The invitation may come in the form of a thought you didn't think before, an impulse that feels clean rather than anxious, or an opportunity that seems almost too simple. These signals often drift into your awareness quietly because they match your new identity so well that they don't feel foreign. They feel like the next logical step because they are. The challenge is that the old identity still lingers at the edges of the mind, offering doubt, caution, or unnecessary analysis. Following the first signal without hesitation does not mean acting recklessly or rushing. It means honoring the coherence you have established by choosing alignment over old patterns. Hesitation comes from the identity you are leaving behind. It evaluates the moment through fear, logic built on outdated assumptions, or the expectation that change must feel difficult. But the new identity recognizes the signal immediately. It feels a sense of inevitability, a knowing that the first step is already here. Acting on that knowing stabilizes the new state in a way nothing else can. The first signal is rarely the full picture. It is a beginning, a thread, an opening. You don't need to know where it leads. You only need to recognize that it fits the version of you who has already shifted. When you follow it, you communicate something powerful to your nervous system and to the field around you. The new identity is in charge. You reinforce coherence, and coherence amplifies the signal in return. This creates a feedback loop that strengthens your alignment with the new timeline. If you ignore the first signal, the shift doesn't disappear, but the pathway becomes less direct. The old identity regains influence. The timeline wavers between trajectories. This is why hesitation feels heavy. It is a return to the momentum of the past. But when you follow the first signal, even if the action is small, you anchor the new identity in the physical world. You give the internal shift a corresponding external expression, and reality responds by opening the next step. The first signal is always enough. It doesn't need to be grand. It only needs to be acknowledged. When you follow it without hesitation, you demonstrate trust in the coherence you've established. And that trust becomes the bridge between the state you've claimed and the reality that is now aligning with it.